Planet Earth is 71% covered by water, of which only about 5% has been explored by humans. I don't think there's anywhere on Earth with more secrets than the ocean. This story is about a secret hidden in the Gulf of Alaska, a tale that few have lived to tell, and one that answers questions that have lingered for years. And yet, some questions are better left unanswered. Kodiak Island, Alaska, Port Lions. Ryan grabbed a coat from the closet, threw on a rain jacket, and stepped out of the bed and breakfast. He crossed the street through the downpour and made his way to the nearest lookout by the sea. He tried to light a cigarette, but the wind was too strong. Frustrated, he simply stood there watching the rain fall in sheets. He spent a long time staring at the large drops slamming into the churning sea. He hadn't been able to sleep for days, almost a week since the mission began. Ryan was a marine geologist. Along with a group of independent scientists, he had set out to investigate a series of strange and puzzling events along the coast of Kodiak Island. The news had briefly covered reports of dead marine animals washing up on shore and mysterious attacks on vessels, but the incidents were never fully explained. Ryan, who had participated in multiple expeditions across Alaska, was contacted by colleagues eager to uncover the truth. Derek, Malcolm, and Stephen had sent an email invitation. Attached were audio files, recordings and reports from studies on marine vibrations, suggesting that more was happening beneath the Gulf of Alaska than isolated accidents. Ryan didn't need much convincing. A quick 45-minute video call with the team sealed the deal. The conversation was filled with conspiracy theories, legends, and rumors about Kodiak Island, stories that demanded verification. It took 30 days after that call for the team to finally meet on the island, specifically in the town of Port Lions, where the most striking reports had originated. Like the rest of the team, Ryan brought a stack of newspaper clippings and articles from reputable outlets. Some team members had even interviewed the authors of those pieces. Their research snowballed into a growing mass of questions and half-answers. But full answers they believed would come in time. Kodiak Island's unpredictable weather was another challenge, a constant factor that could shape or stall the mission. For now, the relentless storms offered no reprieve. After nearly a week of excursions, they had little to show for their efforts. But, like the weather, luck could change. September 4th, 8 a.m. The team gathered in the dining room of the bed and breakfast. Over breakfast, they vented their frustration about the wasted time. They needed to refine their strategy if they were going to make any progress. After some discussion, they divided the tasks. Ryan and Stephen would focus on gathering information from the town's residents, while Derek and Malcolm would handle coordinating excursions with local boats. Ryan and Stephen spent the morning wandering through the town, searching for leads or at least useful comments. The best place to get the local perspective on the strange incidents was the Kodiak dock. That's where the fishermen gathered, and as soon as Ryan and Stephen approached, it was clear they had already been recognized. News of their mission had spread quickly. Port Lions was small enough that 5 visiting scientists didn't go unnoticed. Stephen took the lead, chatting easily with the locals. It wasn't difficult to break the ice. The sun was shining brightly that morning, as if the storm from the night before had been swept to another part of the world. The horizon, framed by lush green trees, was breathtaking, and the sea lay calm and glassy. While Stephen spoke with one of the fishermen, laughing as he tried to explain what he'd read in news articles, Ryan stood off to the side, quietly watching the waves.
The media makes me laugh. What's happening here is far bigger than anything you or the press can imagine. I've seen it with my own eyes. It's not a wild animal. What lives beneath the sea is a giant sea monster.
Ryan's head snapped toward the conversation upon hearing the words, sea monster. He noticed how the fisherman's tone had shifted, serious now and slightly nervous. For the first time, it felt like someone was taking this seriously.
It hasn't just happened once. I've seen it several times.
Stephen and Ryan exchanged a look as if they just stumbled onto something invaluable.
I suppose this is what you're looking for, a local guide. I can take you to the area where the incidents happened, where I've seen the beast. I know the exact spot. It'll take time and patience, but I promise you'll have a story worth telling. Far better than the ones being written now.
Ryan and Stephen accepted almost without hesitation. They hadn't expected such a positive and immediate lead. In fact, it was so unexpected that they hadn't brought any equipment to document evidence, something the fisherman quickly pointed out. He suggested that for this first trip, they simply experience it firsthand. He promised there'd be no issue taking them back to the site with their gear another time. The three boarded the fisherman's boat, a classic fishing vessel straight out of a movie. It wasn't particularly large, but spacious enough to hold about 20 crew members. The boat had a covered cabin for the captain and fishing nets hanging nearby. It had clearly seen better days, but it was still well maintained. They sailed for 2 hours before reaching a spot between Raspberry Island and Kodiak Island. There, the fisherman cut the engine and said, "Now we wait patiently." Stephen and Ryan exchanged a glance, then sat down, watching the tranquil sea. At first, they were on edge, expecting to witness something extraordinary at any moment, but as the minutes dragged on, their anticipation waned. An hour passed, and the fisherman urged patience. Another half hour crawled by before they finally noticed something. Amid the calm, the boat began to shift slightly. The motion grew more pronounced with each passing moment. Stephen, Ryan, and the fisherman sprang to their feet, each scanning a different side of the boat for any sign of what was happening. The fisherman motioned sharply for them to stay quiet. The boat suddenly lurched, shaking violently and throwing all three of them to the deck. The waters churned furiously for several moments before subsiding into an eerie stillness. Ryan was the first to recover, scrambling upright. That's when he saw it. The sea surrounding the boat had turned a deep red. One by one, the bodies of dead animals began to surface. Fish, crabs, and other marine creatures floated lifelessly, and the crimson hue of the water only deepened as more appeared. Ryan turned to the fisherman, his face pale with shock, silently demanding an explanation.
This is the answer you and the media have been searching for. The Kodiak Dinosaur.
As soon as Stephen and Ryan set foot back on land, they called their colleagues for an emergency meeting in one of the rooms at the bed and breakfast. Derek and Malcolm arrived at Ryan's room, where Stephen was already waiting. The moment they walked in, it was clear there was something significant to discuss. Stephen and Ryan recounted every detail of their experience, the fisherman, the location, and the events at sea. Before leaving the dock, they stopped to speak with Tamur, the fisherman, and took his number. The adrenaline from their story filled the room. Meanwhile, Derek and Malcolm shared that they had found someone with a much larger boat than Tamur's. This person, though skeptical of their mission, was willing to sail at night for a hefty price, motivated more by greed than belief in their cause. It felt like everything had turned around in just one day. That night, another storm battered the coast, so the team decided to unwind at a local bar. After a week of frustration, They had finally made progress and felt they'd earned the break. At Jack's Tavern, they nursed a few beers as the hours ticked by. From the moment they arrived, Stephen noticed someone watching them. A man with a thick beard, wearing a raincoat and a hat, sat at the bar, nursing his drink. He didn't speak, but his eyes never left the team. His quiet, deliberate movements had an unsettling weight to them, as though he knew something they didn't. As the night wore on, the man finally stood and made his way towards Stephen. The room seemed to quiet as he approached. Stephen braced for a harmless comment, but the man's words carried a weight that left no room for humor. "I know what you're planning. You're not the first to come here looking for answers. Others have tried, scientists, adventurers, even the military. They all thought they could outsmart it, but the sea doesn't forgive, and neither does what lives beneath it." Stephen froze, his throat dry as the man leaned closer, his breath reeking of salt and stale beer. "Many have been buried in those waters, their names forgotten. The only answer you'll find is death, and trust me, the beast will make sure of that." He placed his empty mug on the counter and walked out into the rain, leaving Stephen stunned. When Stephen turned back to the table, Ryan and the others were watching him. "What did he say?" Ryan asked, his voice low. Stephen hesitated, his stomach churning. Something about people dying, and the sea keeping its secrets. Derek checked the time. It was past midnight, and they decided the best course of action was to get some rest and not dwell too much on the encounter. September 5th, 7 a.m. The team gathered in one of the rooms at the bed and breakfast and decided it was time to officially invite Timur, who they now considered part of the group. Caution was crucial. News of more marine animal carcasses washing ashore was only a matter of time. The key thing was that the plan remained intact, and everyone reaffirmed their commitment to the mission. The next expedition was set for the following night, so they needed to finalize the details. The team decided to split up. After listening to Ryan, Stephen, and Timur's accounts, they agreed that only 2 people would go with the boat's captain. Considering the high risk of death, they needed a backup plan to ensure the mission could continue if anything went wrong. They drew lots, writing everyone's name on small slips of paper and dropping them into a cup. Names were drawn until 2 remained, Ryan and Derek. During a break in the planning, Ryan stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. Timur followed, asking for one as well. Ryan handed it to him without hesitation. Until then, Ryan hadn't really had a chance to study Timur closely. He was an unusual man. Tribal tattoos coiled around his neck, and his skin bore the marks of a hard life. His hands were scarred, as one might expect from a seasoned fisherman. Ryan shared the story of the man who had approached them at Jack's Tavern. Timur listened quietly, his expression calm and unreadable, until Ryan finished. Timur rolled up his sleeve, revealing an arm marked by deep scars and a faded tattoo of a massive marine reptile creature. The ink had blurred over time, but the detail was unmistakable. The long neck, the glowing eyes, the monstrous jaws. He took a long drag from his cigarette, his expression hard as he exhaled. "This isn't just a creature," he muttered. "It's the sea itself, a guardian or a curse. I've lost friends to it, people who thought they were untouchable." Ryan frowned, his unease growing. "Why stay then, if you've seen what it can do?" Timur smirked bitterly, crushing the cigarette underfoot. "You don't leave, Ryan. Not really. The sea doesn't let you. It calls you back over and over until you've paid your price." September 6th, 9 p.m. It took a day and a half for the team to prepare for their first nighttime expedition at sea. According to the draw, Ryan and Derek were set to go on the boat together. However, at the last moment, Derek gave up his spot to Stephen. The nerves had gotten to him. He'd spent the night sleepless and was in no condition to go. Tamer also volunteered to join, along with the boat's captain, though by now the captain seemed to be questioning whether the money he was being paid was worth risking his life. Derek and Malcolm stayed on shore, monitoring the vibration sensors integrated into the boat, as well as the underwater cameras and other equipment meant to document evidence. The night was extraordinary, unlike any other they had experienced in Port Lions. For the first time, the stars were clearly visible, and the wind was calm enough not to interfere with the mission. The moon hung over the sea like a guiding compass, illuminating the water below. The boat was undeniably a step up from the fishing vessel they had used before. It had 2 decks, an integrated radar system, and a communication link to the port for emergency assistance. Although the expedition wasn't entirely legal, everything was carefully planned, and so far, the mission had gone smoothly. Within 2 hours, they arrived at the designated location between Raspberry Island and Kodiak Island. What followed was a test of patience. Endless patience. The wait stretched on, longer than usual. 2 hours passed without any significant activity. Occasionally, the sensors picked up movement from animals passing near the boat, but nothing extraordinary. Then, just as they were about to call it quits around midnight, the vibration sensors overloaded and abruptly shut down. Derek radioed Ryan to report the issue, but Ryan replied that nothing unusual was visible on the surface. He and Stephen scanned the edge of the boat, searching for signs of anything out of the ordinary. That's when they heard Tamer muttering something. They moved toward him, unsure of what had caught his attention. Moments later, all 3 of them stood silently, staring at the horizon. Ryan grabbed the radio and urged Derek to check the feed, then turned on the camera to stream the footage live. But Derek reported distorted signals. Something was interfering with the transmission. Ryan hurried to the captain's cabin to ask if he could see what they were witnessing, only to find the captain frozen in shock, staring at the radar. A blinking mass, 3 times the size of the boat, was rapidly closing in. From the boat, a massive hump broke the horizon, a dark, glistening curve that shimmered like slick, ancient armor. It moved unnaturally fast, creating waves that rippled outward like tremors. No one reacted at first, frozen in disbelief as the shape grew larger with every passing second. The low groan of the water under its bulk reached their ears, a sound so deep it felt like the sea itself was warning them. It wasn't until the silhouette towered over the boat that they realized they were facing something far larger and far more terrifying than any creature they had ever imagined. Ryan ran out of the captain's cabin and yelled, "Everyone to the back!" They began running, but it was already too late. The figure loomed, its sheer size overwhelming. The head that breached the surface was monstrous, scaled and ridged like a reptilian titan from an ancient world. Its eyes, 2 glowing orbs, burned with an unnatural intelligence. The creature's jaws opened, revealing rows of jagged, bone-crushing teeth. It let out a guttural roar that reverberated through the air and water alike, rattling the boat as if it were a child's toy. A sharp, briny scent filled the air, and a mist of seawater sprayed across the deck, leaving an acrid, metallic tang in its wake. The creature slammed into the side of the boat with its massive head. The vessel groaned under the impact, violently pushed to one side. Everyone was thrown off their feet, clutching onto anything to avoid being flung into the sea. The boat tilted precariously before finally stabilizing. Derek's frantic voice came over the radio. "Are you okay? Report." Ryan took a moment to recover, grabbed the radio, and informed Derek that everyone appeared to be fine, though he was still checking to be sure. The silhouette disappeared beneath the water, vanishing from sight. Ryan yelled to the captain to start the boat and get them out of there. The captain snapped out of his shock and started the engines. Stephen and Tamor stayed alert as the boat began to move slowly. Without warning, the beast surged from the depths, its ridged back slicing through the water like the blade of a guillotine. It slammed into the boat with such force that the entire vessel groaned and splintered, metal screaming as it scraped against a rock. The boat's systems immediately shut down. Radars, radios, and all forms of communication were lost. Water sprayed everywhere, soaking the crew in icy sheets as the air filled with the stench of decay, like rotting seaweed and dead fish. Ryan, on his knees, looked up just in time to see the creature's massive tail, thick and ridged, disappear back into the depths. Tamor stumbled across the deck, his voice cracking as he grabbed Ryan by the shirt and shouted, "We've lost Stephen!" The words hit like a physical blow. Ryan's head snapped up, and for a moment he thought he misheard. But the panic in Tamor's eyes confirmed it. His stomach churned as he scanned the deck, calling out, "Stephen! Stephen!" The only answer was the lapping of the waves against the battered boat. Ryan scrambled to the cabin, frantically trying to turn on the boat's lights, but nothing responded. The captain announced he was starting the emergency generator. They searched the boat for Stephen, but he was nowhere to be found. Meanwhile, the waves began rocking the boat violently once more. The beast was retreating, its massive silhouette breaking the surface as it sped away, as if it had already accomplished its mission. The boat's engine sputtered to life, but the silence on board was deafening. The captain's knuckles turned white as he gripped the wheel, his voice trembling with suppressed panic. "We're going back. I've had enough of this shit," he muttered, barely audible over the hum of the motor. "We can't just leave him," Ryan shouted, his voice breaking. He stepped toward the captain, fists clenched, but Tamor placed a hand on his shoulder. His face was pale, his lips trembling as he whispered, "Ryan, he's gone." "You don't know that," Ryan snapped, shrugging off Tamor's grip. Desperation flooded his voice. "We have to try. He could be out there waiting for us." The captain interjected with a sharp retort. When Ryan didn't respond, the captain reached for his gun, aiming it squarely at Ryan. "We're going back, or this boat becomes another coffin, understood?" Tamor tugged at Ryan's sleeve, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "He's right. The odds," Tamor faltered, then whispered, "We'll die if we stay." Ryan's shoulders slumped. His throat burned with words he couldn't say, his mind racing with images of Stephen, of his friend smiling just hours earlier. Finally, he gave a slight nod and muttered into the radio, "Derek, Malcolm, we're coming back." As the boat approached land, the air grew heavier, thick with adrenaline, sadness, and fear. Police lights flashed in the darkness. Tamor stood motionless at the edge of the deck, his face pale, his eyes fixed on the figures waiting for them. "They're not here to help," he muttered. "They're here to make sure you don't come back." Ryan glanced at him, confused. "What are you talking about?" Tamor turned, his gaze hard. "The people here, they know what's in the water. They've made their peace with it. You and your team. You've stirred something they'd rather leave alone." When the boat docked, Ryan and Tamor stepped onto the pier, their legs unsteady, their faces pale. Derek and Malcolm rushed over, but before they could ask about Stephen, an officer intercepted them. His expression was cold, his tone sharper. "You're done here," he said. "This island isn't safe. People disappear. You'll take the first flight out, no exceptions." Ryan glanced at the small crowd of locals watching from the shadows, their faces unreadable. No one stepped forward, no one offered help. They all knew, but none would speak. The message was clear. The sea kept its secrets, and so would they. As Ryan turned back to the boat, the crushing weight of Stephen's absence settled in. Whatever they had seen, whatever had taken Stephen, would remain a mystery buried by the island and its people. The last meeting took place in Ryan's room at the bed and breakfast, the air heavy with grief. Derek paced back and forth, his voice cracking as he said, "We shouldn't have let him go. We should have planned better. We should have..." He stopped abruptly, his shoulders heaving as he fought back sobs. Tamur sat silently by the window, staring out at the sea. "It wasn't your fault," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "This thing, it doesn't let anyone live." Malcolm slammed his fist against the table, his face red with anger. "So what? We just leave? Pretend none of this happened? Stephen's dead and we're running away like cowards." Ryan flinched at the words, his stomach twisting with guilt. He hadn't said a word since they'd returned. He wanted to scream, to tell them he'd tried to fight, that he'd begged to stay, but the words felt hollow in his throat. Instead, he stared down at the table, his hands clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. Finally, he looked up, his voice shaking. "Stephen didn't die because of us. He died because of that thing. And if we stay, it'll take the rest of us too." His voice cracked and he had to take a deep breath before continuing. "We have to leave, but we don't forget. We owe it to Stephen to tell the truth, no matter what it costs us." By 7:30 a.m., Ryan invited Tamur for one last cigarette. A light rain had started to fall as they crossed the street from the bed and breakfast to sit by the sea. Raindrops rippled across the surface of the water. Neither of them said a word the entire time they sat there. When Tamur finally said his goodbye and walked away, Ryan stayed behind, still seated, gazing out at the water. As Ryan sat staring at the water, his breath caught. A faint ripple broke the otherwise still surface, and from the depths a silhouette rose. It wasn't large, just a glimpse of a spine, its scales catching the pale moonlight and glimmering like wet stone. It sank back into the water with a whisper, leaving behind only a faint ripple that quickly faded, as if the sea was eager to bury the creature's existence.